Thank you for joining Dr. James, Rini, and I, the Curiosity Conduit, for a look behind the curtain of Letting Destiny Deliver. An author and 47 years of experience as a practicing psychotherapist, Dr. Rini brings profound insight into the dimensions of consciousness. I bring my own lens as a retired law enforcement officer, now immersed in the study of psychology. Together, we invite you into a dialogue where destiny meets awareness and curiosity leads the way. Today, we will start Chapter 6, the Fantasy Zone, and we'll go into gaps in awareness. This conversation may lead to feelings of inspiration and curiosity, and it could create some inner movement. That's all welcome. Life will reveal your destiny through all opportunities you keep yourself available for. So allow yourself to stay open, and let's see what destiny delivers. So going into this first quote, it says, fantasy is indispensable as a tool because it allows us to plan, analyze, rehearse, visualize, and talk to ourselves. Okay, so I really hadn't thought about when you're talking to yourself or you're visualizing things, that is really fantasy.
All thinking is fantasy.
Oh,
According to Carl Jung, and I agree with that, all thinking is fantasy.
And then as I'm learning this, all thinking is fantasy. And then you have your conscious mind and your ego that helps you discern what is reality and what is not.
Very true.
Okay.
Here, I'm going to read you a poem. And I just wrote it this weekend, and it's on fantasy. All thinking is fantasy. Fantasy has no limits and can be mistaken for reality. Fantasy allows us to be creative as well as captive. Fantasy exists consciously and unconsciously. Because of this, the unconscious mind has to come to the conclusion, is it fantasy or illusion? For the unconscious, everything is real. Everything we think and feel, every anxiety born out of what if, everything we dream. Only when we awaken can we discover our illusions.
That's so good. And when you say awaken, which that could mean many things, what did you mean by that?
Well, literally, when we awaken from the dream, then we can recognize that it's a dream and not real. Plus, we live under many illusions.
So many.
And we have to awaken from them in order to be in touch with reality.
And the reason why I ask is when you're talking about awaken, it makes me think of awakening around that age of 40 and things like that, right, where it's not necessarily where you're living in a dream, but
well, that's more developmental. Yeah. You've had so much life that now your brain is putting everything together and questioning everything and having you assess, how do I want to live the rest of my life? Around between 40 and 50, that's almost universal.
Yes, well, I'm feeling it. 46, turning 47. So yes, definitely. And so this is what I put under and kind of categorized as the second pathway, awareness of conscious and unconscious minds. Would that be what applied the most, right? Okay.
So let me add one more thing to this. We're the only living thing that we have encountered yet that has a self-reflective consciousness. So that's why fantasy allows us to plan and analyze and rehearse and visualize and reflect, because we have the conscious and unconscious, which allows us then to be self-reflective. Unfortunately, many people do not engage in self-reflection, so they do not utilize this gift that only human beings, as we know today, have. They squander it by not using it or running away from it even.
It really is a gift, and it's essential for, to me, self-health and development.
Absolutely. If the boiler room is what provides the power to drive a ship, then fantasy provides the power to drive the mind. As such, the fantasies we entertain go a long way in determining whether we reach our destination or not. Consciousness through fantasy helps transform the potential of mind, body, and spirit into reality.
I also put that also under the second pathway, but it was kind of tying into what you were talking about before.
So let me give you an example of fantasies go a long way in determining our reality or our destination. If you're the kind of person who says, if I didn't have bad luck, I'd have no luck at all, part of what that's going to do to you is you're not going to see it when you have good luck. It becomes a blind spot because of the mindset. So that's why, I encourage people to think the thoughts of what they want versus what they don't want. Because most people think of what they don't want. Like, in helping people, I go, what is it you want? And they'll tell me what they don't want as the answer to what they want. So they're only telling you what they want to eliminate. They're not telling you, and they don't know what it is that they want to add. So that's why, there's I guess, an old biblical saying, as a man thinketh, he is.
When in law enforcement, if you're looking for a car, somebody just committed a crime and you're looking for a red car. Now you see red cars everywhere.
Yeah, consciousness is selective.
Yeah.
It's not random, it's selective.
So
And that's a good example there.
Really choosing, looking at things in a different light, doing that 180, being positive. Self-fulfilling prophecies are real.
They are. And that's one of the things that the mind will produce one way or another. So why not have fantasies that empower you rather than bring you down? And that doesn't mean not dealing with problems, but that's not a fantasy. That's dealing with real problems. But hopefully you can engage your creative processes in resolving them in a way that you not only solve the problem, but you are thankful you had the problem.
Yes. And it goes, everybody's personal beliefs are different, but mine is just whatever is being put in front of you is for something for you to learn from. It's for a reason. And so.
And if you look at it that way, then you look at what you stand to gain rather than what you've lost, you see.
Yeah, and you gain so much more.
And the difference between destructive stress and constructive stress is, with destructive stress, you're looking at what you're losing. With constructive stress, you're looking at what you're gaining.
Oh, I like that. I really like that.
The power of what we think and being more responsible and more attuned to thoughts are not something we should take for granted. Like, I'll give you one more thought that comes to mind. When people catastrophize or they worry, the unconscious doesn't know it's a fantasy. They think it thinks it's really going on because they can't discern fantasy from reality. So, of course, if you think about trauma you've had, your body's going to respond as if you're going through that trauma right now.
Because mind and body are one. They're connected.
Well, and the unconscious doesn't know that it's just a fantasy. Like, we wake up, oh, it's a dream,
Yeah.
So that's why I say it's very important to be mindful and responsible with your thoughts. Now, there are intrusive thoughts, and we can't control that, but the thoughts we can control, to, again, realize that the contents of your thought go a long way in determining your physical and mental well-being.
So I have an example of this, and it was real live, and I was able to watch this yesterday. I have a family member, and they have diabetes. And yesterday they received some stressful news. Well, I happened to be connected to an app to where I could see blood sugar. I literally sat there. It's not heart rate, it is blood sugar, and watched after, and I could see the moment and the delay and everything like that. The blood sugar was spiking like 30 points or grams or whatever it is, 30 higher, as they were digesting the stressful news. And so that's an example of what they're experiencing in their mind, and it's connected to the body.
Blood sugar, yeah.
Right.
I had a client, he is an attorney, and he got a glucose monitor because he wanted to do that. And he said, I can control diet and exercise, but the one thing he found out, that stress is the one thing that most impacted his blood sugar.
Yes, and that's facts.
Yeah.
Yep. And, life is full of stress. It is not going to go away, I suppose. It depends on how you manage it, though, if it turns into that way.
See, that brings me to, again, how you think about something. So,
your mindsets or beliefs.
Yeah, so
right?
I have a mindset that stress really makes me stronger and healthier, which is contrary to the common notions of what stress does.
I also share that belief.
And the proof of it is, because most people think you're crazy when you say that, is weightlifting. You're tearing the muscle up, you're tearing it down. But in tearing it down, you're building it up. So looking at stress, again, is something that you can gain. You can gain from it, because the other saying is, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger, which is another proof that stress can really be beneficial.
Well, it is beneficial. And you see, when people are the highest functioning, and who are people who I name as beasts, who are just operating at the highest levels, they
Yeah, but
you
they've
know.
mastered the ability to handle stress.
Okay.
The
And what's the
common everyday
difference?
person, not so much.
Right, okay. But this is
I mean,
where,
they'll drink or they'll drug
yeah,
or they'll smoke or they'll oversleep or, things none of which are good for you.
right, because they have all the
Or maybe they'll become hostile or violent or mean or none of those things are good for you.
Very true. So the questions remain. Will this infinite stream of information and knowledge empower us to grow? Or will it drown us in a flood of babble? Will we use fantasy to distort and destroy? Or to discover and develop? Will we fill the gaps in awareness with toxicity or nourishment? And I applied the fourth pathway: avoid passive information processing, because it just felt like it fit
Perfect.
the
No, I think it's very
most
good. You're right.
with this.
See, now you have to appreciate again that I wrote this 35 years ago, these questions.
Mm-hmm.
So the questions have been answered to a large extent.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, we haven't used it to empower us to grow. And we are drowning in a flood of babble. And it is being used to distort or destroy rather than discover and develop.
You're talking about in society, right? As a
Yeah,
group,
yeah. It's
human.
yes, socially speaking.
Yes, okay.
Which then impacts the individual because
It does. And that passive information is so important. I can tell you about a week and a half ago, I completely got off of social, to where if I got a message and I need to check it for the business or something like that, I do that. But no more doom scrolling, no more, not even things that I was interested in. I'm focusing on other stuff right now, but it's more human contact and more human interaction, more fruitful things than the emptiness of that doom scrolling and fake internet, social media.
well, I like the way you've tied that into passive information processing as it is. It's super passive.
Like, I feel better. I'm dealing with a lot of stuff and managing it, but I feel better just for doing that and making adjustments.
Yeah, because you're not taking in all that information. We are information processing machines. And there's cognitive information and there's non-cognitive information. Cognitive information is, again, our thinking, our fantasy. Non-cognitive information are food, drugs, viruses, chemicals, because that is information that we take into our body, and our body then acts on the information. Like alcohol, you put it in your body, it's going to change how your brain functions because it's information that you have fed your brain. So everything we do is processing information, cognitive or non-cognitive, verbal or non-verbal. So we should be very conscious of what information we take in. Like people say, you are what you eat, right? So you were very conscious of what you eat, but we also have to be very conscious of information. I think it's interesting that the FDA has to approve drugs and those kinds of things before they're out there, but information, not at all. It doesn't do anything to protect us from bad information.
It's really difficult. I don't think until this past year had I really taken the time to even understand the comment of being responsible with what I'm taking in. And so just taking little steps everywhere between the news and what I've seen, and just kind of phasing that out, and now into some of the social media. Now I feel like since then I'm like, whoa, okay. I feel like something, like another like blanket was taken off my eyes and I could see a little bit more clear, and I feel better from it. So it's tough though to be in this society and be responsible with that, and understanding what it does to yourself.
That saying, you are what you eat.
Mm-hmm.
I was on a cruise and my wife and I were in the gym, and they were doing some health thing, by our side. And the lady who was doing the training was saying, the same thing. People say you are what you eat. She goes, no, you are what you don't excrete. And to me, that says it all right there. It's what you hold on to.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is true. I mean, you could say that figuratively and literally.
Right.
Because those two things work together. And I've had that before too.
And I'll give you, I guess, an example. Toxic people are toxic because they can't remove their toxicity.
And they just don't know what they don't know a lot of the times.
Yeah, no, it's normal for them.
Definitely. It's tying right into what we were talking about. Be careful not to underestimate the power of thought, because turning fantasy into reality is easier than you think. And I chose the action of repetition on this one, but maybe there's something different. You tell
Well,
me.
I like the ones that you're picking because the thing about thinking is we tend to obsess a lot or be fixated on certain thought patterns or habitual thought patterns. And so, yes, the repetition of that thought, like if you ask yourself, why am I so stupid? Your unconscious will answer that. Well, you're stupid because of this, that, and the other. And in doing that, then you start characterizing yourself as stupid. And now you have details to
Fill in the blanks.
and reinforce that you're stupid. So be careful what questions you ask your brain because it's going to answer them.
Or if somebody made a mistake or something happened and they say, I'm such a loser.
Exactly.
I'm such a loser. I'm broken. I can't believe this. I can't choose the right person. Like, these are all statements I've heard. I'm sure you've heard them too.
Absolutely.
And it's just not true. I don't find it. It's like people are, you're humans. You're learning. You're making mistakes. You're far away from yourself. That's how I look at it. What do you say?
And that's why we have to empower ourselves with thought as opposed to handicap ourselves with thought. But again, that's hard to do because I don't know. One, I think instinctively we don't do that. For example, we tend to focus on what's not going right rather than what is going right. And I think that's to keep us adapting and growing. And then, there's just so much negativity in the world. And that's put out there all the time. I mean, news centers don't broadcast good news. They only broadcast bad news, and so we're getting that information all the time. And the repetitiveness of that then will create mindsets. Like one year, the murder rate had actually gone down, but the news reported the murders 300% more than they did the year before. So it was as if the murder rate was going up, not down. Like at one point a few years back, they were, you always saw on TV all these child abductions. So you think, oh my God, it's so common. No, it's very rare, really, because you see it on the news all the time.
Well, and it's usually, it was like parental abductions related usually. So they put the stats still out there. And so it looks.
Right. So, so you get
this distortion of information.
Right. Right.
And then, because we know that the fear of, for instance, crime opposed to actual crime is worse.
Right. Because it's so put out there all the time.
Yeah. And then you're constantly worrying about it when statistically you may never even see it.
And another reason not to be passive about acquiring information.
Yes. So difficult though. It's rough. That's a tough one.
Well, yeah, but and the one thing I'm thinking maybe that can happen or people use is one way to not be passive is to Google the information. Is this valid? Is this a hoax? Because a lot of times you can find that out if something is real or not real. I'm not talking about news or these other kinds of things that people can spin.
Yes.
And twist, but more.
It's so tough. And then does it even matter to where you got to look it up? I look at that too.
That's a good point. Yeah. Does it matter?
Are you wasting your time and looking at something that doesn't even matter and you could literally take that moment to do something nice or kind for yourself?
Well, here's another area that people are passive about information without quite realizing it. They only listen to people who say what they want to hear. And that makes you passive about information because you're looking for validation of what you think as opposed to, well, am I missing something here?
Right. And that doesn't help with the opposing forces within.
It doesn't. But unfortunately, human nature is we want to be told we want to hear what we already believe. The same opposing forces that drive human nature and human consciousness also create gaps in our awareness. These gaps are dynamic as they compel us to fill them with either fantasy or action. How we fill these gaps determine whether we achieve self-health or self-sabotage.
Okay, so what are you saying there?
So what we don't know can work against us. They used to say ignorance is bliss, right? They may still say it, but
sometimes I think it's true. maybe not. I don't know. Depends on what it is, I suppose.
Well, it may be true, but I prefer not to be ignorant.
Yes.
I'd rather go through the suffering and the pain than not be ignorant.
I agree with you.
Be happy, fat, and ignorant,
I agree with you.
All right, so, there's a saying that, people don't even know they don't know. That's a huge gap. Let's say you're under some legal action which is stressful because you don't know how it's going to turn out. So people can fill that gap with drugs and alcohol and all kinds of things that are not good for them and probably is not going to help them fill the gap. But that's how they fill that gap until they have the actual knowledge, which says you're either guilty or not guilty. See,
Or you just pay a shark with
Yeah,
a
so-
lawyer
yeah.
and make it just
if you
never
can
gonna
afford
get.
one, you can. And that's most people to do that.
No, I know some people can't. Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand.
But so there's gaps all over the place, you know. So be mindful how you fill in the unknown. You see, like whether there's a God or not, that's an unknown. People can be atheists or they can be, fanatics in terms of religion. How you fill that gap makes a big difference. There's this movie, The Life of Pi, and he tells this story how he was on a boat with all these animals and how they survived. And at the end, the question was, were they really animals or were there other people on the boat, that you had to deal with? And I guess then they got into, if there's a God or not, and go, well, which one are you better off believing?
That there is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I love that part of the movie. It's like, well, which one, are you better off believing?
And then why not?
Yeah, why
There's
not?
so
'Cause
much.
either way, they're beliefs.
It's very positive.
Yeah, it's how
It's
you fill the gap.
nice. It helps you have a solid belief system. And
Well, if you believe there's like a life hereafter and how you live life on this planet determines your life hereafter, how you fill the gap makes a big difference in terms of the kind of person then you're going to be potentially. I mean, there are people who don't believe in God and can be good people. I don't mean that.
sure.
But a lot of people go, oh, you only live once. I'm going to do whatever I can. And they have no morals or ethics because they think there are no consequences. But there are consequences.
There are consequences.
In this life as well as if there's one after this.
Yes. And what I just see, it's usually, there are consequences to the person, but I am finding as I'm just a student and looking around that there's just a lot of consequences that affect the people around them a lot of times. So that's what I see. But I guess it depends.
Well, let's
Like
say,
their actions and stuff, people's actions.
let's say you're a user, you use people. And for the longest time, you're capable of doing that because you're charismatic or you're charming or you're attractive enough. But then you're going to reach a point where you're going to burn all bridges and no one is going to want to be there for you.
So the pathway I attached to this one was action to balance opposing forces. It's the 10th one. It's the last pathway, really, that I think when you're tying it all together and being able to fill those gaps, that's, I feel like, part of the action of the last pathway.
Being single-minded doesn't take you very far.
True.
And being black and white doesn't help either because you're looking at the opposing forces, but you're only looking at them in one state, extreme states. It's those opposing forces have all, it's like Earth, there are lots of planets, but only one planet is going to be the right distance from the sun to produce light.
Right.
So it's not black or white. It's a matter of a continuum. If you're Pluto, you're not going to have life. If you're the planet closest to the sun, you're not going to have life. Earth and Mars, yeah, okay, that's more possible because it's the right distance. So you have that. I guess the way I would put it is being black or white isn't dealing with opposing forces. Integrating the two poles is how you deal with the opposing forces.
And that makes more sense to me because when I visualize a certain situation, I'm seeing myself at times where I'm on this like teeter-totter. And then sometimes I'm going a little further on the teeter-totter. Well, then the other side starts to come up higher and you're like, whoa, and you gotta like dive and
Oh, teeter-totter's a great
and you're
analogy, yeah.
diving. Sometimes you're just going a little bit and sometimes you're diving on both sides to get this going and you're like, okay, let me go right more in the center so it's a little bit more balanced, but it's never perfect. It's always moving.
Well, see, the other thing I like about teeter-totter, is in order for it to be fun, you got to be going up and down, back and forth.
Yes.
If you're stuck at top or the bottom,
Well, you gotta have fun,
you
know?
have to have the dynamic. You have to have motion in there.
Yes. No, for sure. I completely agree. Anything else on that?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Thank you for joining Dr. Rini and I on this journey behind the curtain of letting destiny deliver. Join us next time as we will discuss the multi-dimensional nature of meaning. Remember to subscribe and like, and questions or comments are welcome below. Now ask yourself, what part of your life might destiny be trying to speak through right now? Keep exploring, stay curious, and remember, destiny isn't something you chase, it's something you allow. Until next time, be well.